Ilana Razbash, and this is Radio Architecture.
Good evening from beautiful Bunurong country. We are broadcasting to you live from the unceded lands of the Eastern Kulin Nation. As always, if you'd like to join the conversation this evening, you can text us in the studio hotline on 0493 213 831. We'd love to have you with us. My conversation partner this evening is Yvonne Meng. She's the director and co-founder of Circle Studio Architects in Inner West Melbourne. Alongside Amber Lang, the small but nimble practice is proudly female-owned and focuses on a collaborative process between client, architect and builder. Yvonne is interested in human-centred spaces that promote community and social well-being. She recently submitted her PhD, The Architecture of Footpaths, at Monash University, which examines the importance of footpaths as a public space. Yvonne is active in Melbourne's architecture community and has published articles, sat on award juries, spoken at talks and conferences, and is a member of the Australian Institute of Architects editorial committee. Yvonne has also taught extensively across Monash, the University of Melbourne and RMIT. She previously co-curated the popular monthly Process Talks and co-chaired the Victorian Imagine Committee. Yvonne believes strongly in advocating for equality across all aspects in the architecture profession. Outside of architecture, you can find Yvonne hanging from a silk at the Women's Circus, throwing vessels on a pottery wheel, or painting for the fun of it. She is a proud mum, or occasional servant, of 2 rescue greyhounds. Welcome to the program, Yvonne.
Hi, I wouldn't say occasional servant. I'd say probably 90% servant to the greyhounds. But anyway,
I love that I can see them in the background of your screen tonight as well. I feel that the hounds are joining us for this conversation.
Always.
And you're dialing in tonight.
Yes, I'm dialing in from Warringy, Warong. So Footscray, West Footscray technically.
Welcome to the program. So good to chat to you. And again, I'm really excited about having the opportunity to talk about residential projects, because sometimes that actually doesn't happen enough in our industry.
Yeah, and considering I think it forms the bulk of a lot of small practice work, and it's not a civic project. It's not something that necessarily. It's not always fancy, but I think it's something that can impact the life of someone quite heavily because they're engaging with it every day. So, better homes and homes that are well designed and well appreciated, I think, are really important. And if they because they form the bulk of what a lot of architects do, then yeah, it's an important thing to sort of really engage and acknowledge.
Absolutely. We'll get stuck into it a little bit later in the conversation, but the first question I like to ask all my guests, and you're smiling there because I think you know what it is as a listener of the show, it's what's your earliest memory of a building or place?
NGV. When I was little, my parents used to take me a lot because it's a great public building. You can kind of go into the back and everything, but my favourite part was the water wall. So I used to just hang around there and just splash around, get really wet because it was so playful. And yes, it's a big, beautiful, serious building and everything. But the fact that you had this very tactile sort of facade before you were even entered into the doorway, that was my earliest memory of, I guess, a space that I really loved and engaged with. And then, afterwards, obviously growing up, you go to architecture school and realise, yes, this is all very fancy and everything. But for me, that first moment was the water wall and being so playful with it as a child.
Oh, I love that. Row Ground's masterpiece as well. Could you imagine building something like that now?
Oh, wouldn't that be nice? It is just so beautiful, though. It's like, water wall aside, the way that the forms come together is incredibly beautiful. Just this beautiful, very singular material that you get at the front. But also I think what's really great about it is that that little garden out the back. I love that because you can just go in if you're around the area, lunch break, it's free, it's public, and you don't have to pay to use it, and it's available for everyone. There's no sort of, there's no discrimination really in access. And I think that's really important to have in the city as well.
Absolutely. Not to mention some of the permanent collection at the NGV that is
Yeah.
just free and open access as well. So,
Yeah, absolutely.
so important to have those cultural and civic and creative spaces that we can come
Yeah.
to.
Yeah, absolutely. But yeah, Waterwall, yeah, takes a cake.
You're really passionate about this question of equality in our profession and in the built environment. How important is protecting these sort of spaces?
Oh, I mean, definitely really important. I think it's getting harder and harder to find true public spaces as well. I like most people love cafes. I love outdoor cafes, and since COVID happened, you've got these outdoor parklets, and they're really great, and they're a form of public space. But end of the day, they're kind of not really that open because you've got to pay someone patronage to be able to use them. So you've got this increasing privatization of public space where you might be able to see it, you might be able to walk over it, but you can't really stay in it that long unless you give someone money, which is kind of pretty annoying, really. But libraries are a really great other public space or public building as well. And I think they're fantastic because, again, no discrimination. You just have a library card, and provided you don't have a fine, which I may or may not have, you can still borrow books for free. And you can access such great things, newspapers, periodicals, local history. It's just all there. And I think they're quite underutilized as well.
How did this contested public space or the study of the street, these parklets that are very actually a provocative topic. There are a lot of people are vehemently against them, and others, often the policymakers, think that it's going to be the solution to the local economy. How did that feature in your PhD research?
So I did my PhD in footpaths, so it's currently being examined. Fingers crossed it will pass because I spent a lot of time on that. But I guess I'm on the fence about them. I don't like the way that they aren't really a free space, but they're outside of certain hours they are, because, when a shop closes, no one's going to stop you from sitting there and doing whatever it is that you do. But by the same token, I think they do challenge the way that you think about what not only public space, but what a footpath is as well, because you're literally taking a space away from a car park, and you're extending the footprint of the footpath by the size of a car park, and you're giving it back to the patrons. And because you're doing that and you're able to make that a human space again, yes, it is, technically a kind of paid, not completely public space, but it's better than nothing. Mm. And I kind of like that reshaping, because it does force people to think about, well, actually, if we did have more space for humans, then what will our recreational lives be like, and what will our cities be like? And I think that's an important conversation to have. They're not perfect, nothing is, but I think it's a step in the right direction to get you to think about these sorts of spaces, or streets in general, as more than just pedestrians, cars, tram, shops. I mean, the boundaries are actually quite...
should be more blurred. They should definitely be
more
blurred. We had a whole conversation on this program about modal filters and how do you let certain types of traffic through and others not? How do you let the bikes and pedestrians in and keep the cars away?
Yeah, it's an absolute schmozzle. Like when you look at, sometimes you're surprised it even works at all. But I think what I did look at a lot in my PhD, because I'm not that interested in curbs and infrastructure. You have to know it for what I did, but I'm interested in people. So I was really interested in how people use footpaths and how people use streets. And despite the fact that you've got streets and footpaths being designed very much from an engineering perspective, which is cars go here, curb is here for gutter, people walk here, they must go in a straight line, they mustn't, stop the flow of walking or whatever. But when you start to examine that quite closely, you realise that there's actually a lot of different things that happen in this space that aren't really engineered for, but it's just a natural evolution of how people behave. And I find that really interesting, because I don't think they're talked about enough in the study of, streets, because streets really encompass, you look at trees, you look at cars, you look at, engineering and all that sort of it. But when you start to focus on just the footpath, you can sort of see there's just a whole heap of different activities that happen. Some of them are illegal, and that's okay because people just kind of turn a blind eye. And there's that really interesting grey area as well where the social conventions around a place that allow these sorts of things to happen can be really, really different across different areas.
That social focus and a human focus on behaviour is so critical because we forget we forget what we designed for. We forget who are these cities for, who are they planned for.
Yeah, absolutely. And the thing I've always found interesting about architecture is that, well, maybe I'm a bit critical about as well, is that you're kind of asked to design something and then you have a finished product in inverted commas at the end, but it's not finished because you hand it over, someone else has patronage over it, and then they go and do whatever it is, they live a life, they change it and they adapt it, and that is totally fine. So I don't think a building or a space is ever really finished. It just keeps on evolving, and that extends to cities as well. So, you know, these things never stay the same. Time happens, different flows of people move in, get different demographics, different social conditions. I mean, COVID was a really interesting extreme example of how a very drastic change in social situations really changed the way that we use our cities as well. And then we're still kind of recovering from some of that. So things don't change the same. And I think architects need to embrace that a lot more and just kind of understand that you are the patron of a space for a certain period of time, and then you hand it over, and then someone else can do whatever it is that they do. Like sorry, go on.
I was just going to add that that's sometimes the most exciting moment of handing over the work or the design or the building, handing over the space so that people can turn it into a place.
Exactly, and you kind of go, it's your problem now, so you do what you want with it. But I do like revisiting spaces a few years after they've been done, because you kind of see how people have adapted it, sometimes in ways that you may not have done yourself, but that's okay because I'm not going to live there. That's your home, that's your space now, so you need to make it fit to your life. And I think it's that process of letting go that I've never really had a problem with architecture. I just think it should always be this living, breathing thing. And in my practice through Circle Studio, we do a lot of renovations. And so we've made, bread and butter out of adapting other people's work. And sometimes there's layers upon layer of good and bad interventions that have happened over time. And it's just lifespan of a particular space. And I think some of these things you can really embrace, and then it just adds character.
Exactly. Going in there surgically almost to unpick what you're keeping, what you're working with, what needs to go.
Yeah. Sometimes it is easier to just knock parts down because they just frankly don't stand up anymore. But sometimes you just pull out things you're like, that's kind of fun. Maybe we'll make that into a door. And that's kind of exciting about it. I don't like sterile spaces. I mean, who does really? The big marble-clad lobbies and things like that, that's kind of not really my thing. So I think we find a lot, even in our newer builds, that we try to add a lot of texture and try to add a lot of personality. And I think a lot of our, I guess you could call it philosophy, for want of a better word, for doing projects is that the end user is not us. We'll try and facilitate what our clients want, and we'll obviously put in our own opinions on things, but it needs to be a collaborative process. And if there's something that people really want to bring in, like an old piece of vintage furniture or just something that has a lot of sentimental meaning, then we really want to embrace that, because in the end, it's not about us.
Yeah. It's the home that you're giving to your client, and that's probably their forever home, their long-term investment. How do you define good design?
Ooh, it's a bit. I think that's a tricky one, because for some people it's how something looks. I guess for me it's how it works. So I think good design is something that fits the brief and fits the purpose. So it might not be the same across every context, but if someone is paying you for some design work, then good design is being able to respond to their brief and making sure that what they're getting out of it is what they had set out to achieve. And I think bad design is what comes out when the brief and the end product don't align. And it might be beautiful, but if it's unusable, then what's the point? So yeah, I think that will be my answer to that. There's so many ways of answering that one, but and obviously there's the aspect of, is this sustainable? Is this is this going to stand the test of time? Is there quality in this? And that all adds to the idea of good design. But I think the functionality for me is one of the key important things.
I often repeat this for listeners on the program. I keep coming back to the fact that good design adds value. We know from Dr. Razbash's research at the University of Melbourne and Archie team that it's $11.30 improved capital value for every dollar spent on architect's fees.
Yeah, right. Yeah. I actually didn't know that.
And that's old money. That's before we've had all that 8% inflation.
Oh, you should do like another study on that and just to see what it is.
Maybe Dr. Razbash will do a follow-up, but that's what people get when they get a bespoke home. They get something that fits their needs, right? Something that suits exactly how they live. And if they should have to sell, then they get all that value back and more. Yeah.
It is a bit sad, I think, that housing in Australia is very real estate driven. So you do see a lot of stuff. Look, I'm a sucker for forums and lurking in the comment section because you just see the best. Yeah, I know, right? I never comment, but you see the best and worst of everyone. And sometimes you go on these like internet rabbit holes. Well, I do anyway. And to get a sense of what people are thinking. And the ones around housing and architects is really hilarious. It's like, just a waste of money. I can get a 3-bedder with a drafty. And I think there's this devaluing of the quality of the product that you can get from getting something designed, because there's such a focus on how many bedrooms and how many bathrooms a place has. And end of the day, that's not that important, because you can definitely function with less bedrooms and less bathrooms. It's how well they're placed, where they're placed, and the things around it.
That's absolutely right. You're still paying for those square meters. If you build 4 bedrooms and 4 bathrooms and that's something you don't need, you've paid for that square meterage. Instead of really understanding how you and your family live, how big is your family, how do you need your home to function?
Who wants to clean 4 bathrooms? That's just not, I just find that kind of focus on how many bedrooms and bathrooms is such a silly thing to be.
You should put that on a billboard. Who wants to clean 4 bathrooms? That should be the horror enough to scare people out of the oversized spec builder McMansion. But you do things differently as well in your practice from a process perspective, from a service delivery perspective. What is it like working with Circle Studio?
We get our clients in very early, and we're very collaborative. We started doing this thing where we will have the model up live. We'll have all the samples out. And we just have this massive workshop session. So we're kind of like live designing at the same time. And we're finding that clients are responding to that really well, because they've got agency in how their end space is going to be like. And that's the magic of having BIM. I was a bit resistant to using different software because I was trained on AutoCAD. I'm like, no, AutoCAD, right on, that's it. But then we got onto BIM, and it's just amazing the amount of detail that you can do. And probably other people do this as well, but for us it's a thing that we've started doing the last probably 18 months. And my business partner actually lives in Newcastle. She used to live on the same street as me in Seddon, but when she moved, we needed to find a way to still keep her really involved in the design process, because she only comes down once every month or two. So what we do is we have her on the big screen in the office, and she's got the model open. I'm in the room with the client with the samples, and then we just basically, we're in there. Sometimes these sessions go for hours, and that's fine. But we're just we'll present what we've got, and then we're like, here are some options. What works for you? What doesn't work for you? Let's just walk through the whole thing and, see where we land. And it can be quite experimental as well, which I quite enjoy, because you've got the person who's going to be the end user having agency in what their space is going to be like. They're getting expertise, they're getting feedback on the spot about whether or not something's going to work. And it's very back and forth. And we do this quite a few times in the early stages. And yeah, I've just found it's worked for us.
So much trust, so much vulnerability from your side, and trust from the client side, and also from the architect trusting the client that you can be collaborative in that process.
And I think it should be, because my tastes are very different to the next person. And, if we all did things according to our own tastes, then that'll be kind of boring. And although having said that, if I do look back on past work, there is a bit of a thread. Some things start to look a bit similar, but I don't know. I don't know if that's because clients see that and they come to us because of that.
Do you have a signature style? Is there a signature theme emerging?
We went through a curve stage for a while. Everything had a bit of a curve to it. That was not fun to detail, but it was fun to design.
The builders loved it, I'm sure.
Yeah, they're actually fine about it. We had great... The two that went up at the same time last year were both very, very curvy. So... But it was great because we had such a good experience with both the builders, who were just like, yeah, bring on the challenge. And we do like to bring in our builders really early as well, because it's just easier for everyone to be across what the project's about, instead of coming in the end, finding some random and saying, hey, give us a price. We try and sort of say, look, here's a concept plan. This is what we're thinking. Let's have early conversations about where we can value manage if we need to. If there's any constructability issues, let's hit them early. So it really is about making sure that client and builder and us are working together earlier on rather than later on. So I think that's also changed because, prices went up like significantly, and there is less risk involved to bring someone in early.
When did you pivot to using the ECI model or early contractor involvement as really your go-to full-time choice? When did you stop tendering?
I can't actually remember the last time we tendered. It was probably just before COVID, maybe, that we tendered. But I also found that for resi, tendering isn't such a straightforward process as well, because some builders don't want to tender anything if they're under a certain value. It's really hard to compare apples with oranges, sorry. Some of them take longer. It's quite different to working on public or commercial buildings when the tendering process is a bit more set and rigid. So I think we just found over time, it was easier just to kind of get the client to interview a few people, see who they gel with most, and then start the process from there. Just pick one and go for it and work with them. And I always say to everyone, look, you're going to be giving them a lot of money, so make sure it's someone that you can trust and communicate with. Because if you don't have that relationship, then it's going to be really, really, really hard.
Exactly. You want to keep it as non-adversarial as possible. And that's the main advantage of these early contractor involvements or even mini alliances.
Yeah. Yeah. And shit always goes wrong. Like something's, and that's just what it is. But it doesn't have to be a drama. So it's how you solve the problem and how your builder solves the problem that, it's all fine.
Meanwhile, you're still providing full services and doing using an architect administered contract, doing full contract admin as well.
Depends on the project. So for some we do, for the bigger ones. For some we will do a master builders or HIA, but still be on board as if we were administering the contract. And that unfortunately has come about because of bank loans. So it has been easier for our clients to get bank loans with not the ABIC contract. And end of the day, you want things to be easy for them. So we will often get written into the other contracts as a special clause to say they're still here, we're still on board, but it's just a different piece of paper. We haven't had any trouble with it so far, fingers crossed. So, but having said that, we do work with really good builders. So
again, it's all about those relationships, all about connections.
Yeah, exactly. And again, it has to be someone that we trust will call us when they need to call us and not try and like bury things under concrete. So yeah, but we've been pretty lucky. I think everyone we've worked with in the last few years have been really collaborative, really just communicative. I think that's the main thing for me when I'm looking for a builder for a client. Can you communicate? Are you going to reply to my emails? Are you going to, do things when you say you will? That's really, really important.
How did that aha moment come for you where you and your business partner connected and decided to start Circle Studio?
I was working as a sole practitioner probably for about 2 years before Amber came on board, maybe a year and a half. I don't remember. But I left my job. I was at the City of Melbourne as one of the in-house architects, and I left because I always said when I was at uni, I want to own my own business one day. I want to teach. I want to do my PhD, which in hindsight was just a little bit silly because that's a lot for one person to be doing. But so first couple of years I was still teaching a lot to, I guess, help get through the fact that work was not always consistent. So sometimes you'd have work, sometimes you wouldn't. So it'll just be juggling and balancing everything. And then Amber, who, again, like I said, lived on the same street as me, she came and worked for me for a bit. And I basically said to her, look, documenting these council toilets is not a glamorous job. It's lots of AS 1428, so that's a disability regulations. It's not glamorous. Would you like to do this? Expecting her to just say flat no, go away. But she's like, yeah, sure. So that was the start. That was our first project together. Rosamond Road Bowls toilets. They're very unsexy. But after that, we worked really well together. So I said, I don't want to do this by myself. I've got too much in my head. I hate doing some parts of admin, and I just want to have someone in the space with me because it just gets lonely. So I said, do you want to just like hitch our wagons together and go for it? And she said yes. So it was kind of like it was like asking someone to marry you. It's like, hey, do you want to start a business? There's so much involved. There's so much at stake. But so that was the early years were hard, I think, because trying to establish a name, trying to get projects that weren't like all just a kitchen, and because that's pretty much what we did for a while. It was definitely a challenge trying to establish a practice, but I think in a lot of other ways it also worked for us too, because I think one of the key things that we do try and focus on in our practice is flexibility as well. So I very rarely stay past 5:30. I don't want to. Amber has kids. She needs to pick up, 3:30 every day or 3 o'clock. I don't know when kids get picked up these days, but we've got things outside of architecture that make up our lives, and I didn't want to work in a big practice or another practice anymore because I wanted to be able to control some of that, and I wanted to teach, and I wanted to study, and I wanted to do all of the things which a full-time job, 9 to 5, was just not going to accommodate. But working for yourself does. And I think for Amber, it's a similar thing. She, had very young children that it would have been really hard to go to a practice full-time and be worked to the bone and asked to stay after hours. So I think we've sort of really, set up our practice so that we can choose how we want to live our lives, and architecture is just a part of it.
That's so important. maintaining the complexity and the identity rather than architecture being the whole and soul life. What's emerged, or what have you discovered from now expanding the practice to span between Victoria and Newcastle, between two states?
It's kind of still working quite the same as it was before. I mean, I think I talk to Amber more now that she's interstate because, you know, we have to do Zoom calls. Whereas previously, some days we just kind of like walk in with our coffees and grumble and grunt. And I guess now our conversations are a lot more directed. So I feel like it hasn't really changed what we do in the office. We're still doing the same. We're still doing projects. It's still, the dynamic's still good. So I guess the difference is that it's not as immediate to have someone in the space with you. So there is that.
It sounds like a great success. Often these digital transformations effectively need a lot of change management beforehand. Do you think just working from home, working remotely during the lockdown era has accelerated that for you?
Absolutely. I think if it weren't for lockdown, after she moved, it might have been a different conversation about how our business was structured. But because during lockdown, everyone got used to working remote, that it just didn't really seem like such a stretch for someone to be interstate and remote because, well, it worked fine for 2 years that we were all stuck inside. So what's to say this can't work
it's probably
again?
The best thing that ever happened to industry.
Maybe.
Other than, of course, the cost escalations, more so from the work from home perspective, I mean.
Okay, yeah.
The empowerment or the freedom and the flexibility that most professionals have been able to retain.
Yes. I actually don't like working from home personally. I get nothing done. I just go to sleep. But my office is 5 minutes away from home, so it's like an extended bedroom or extended office that's not too far away. And I like that because I don't have to commute. Before COVID. Sorry?
And I was going to ask you if you obviously walk between home and office.
I can, yeah. It's about a 15-minute walk. 20 if I take my dogs. If I drive, it's 5 minutes. So yeah, it's there's just no commute time, which is you just gaining so much of your life back. I think that's so important.
That experience of the footpath, particularly. I see how you're just constantly engaged in it, and how living in Footscray as well, where there's so much street life, so much footpath life, how that spurred on your PhD. But what was the inspiration, or to choose that as your subject of study?
I started off, so I live in the inner west. I have for a really long time, and I grew up in the west as well. When I started my PhD, I was actually doing it on schools. Sure. And then I remember there's one paragraph that I wrote. This was in like first term, first year, many years ago. This PhD has taken a long time, by the way. There was one line which I said, schools in the area, because they were all being built and whatever, might change the way that people use footpaths. And then all of a sudden that tiny little line became my whole PhD.
That was the aha moment.
Yeah, I guess so. It was a bit of like, oh yeah, this could be really interesting. I did curse that aha moment a lot throughout the process because you're like, I'm so sick of footpaths. And it's not just footpaths. I did footpaths in Footscray, so there was like no getting away from it. Every time you stepped outside, you're like, PhD. But yeah, I guess at the end of the day, the PhD kind of didn't end up being what I set out to do, but it became quite different. But I'm quite happy with where it landed because I ended up focusing so much on the human experience, which is always what I was interested in anyway. And being in Footscray, being a very diverse suburb, my cultural heritage is Chinese, so I was able to kind of bring in a lot of things around, I guess, diversity and the migrant experience and really start to explore that, which is something that I hadn't really explored in detail before, and something I probably avoided doing when I was younger because I always wanted to just sort of fit in. But I think having done this PhD and having gone through that process, it really made me start to engage with my own cultural heritage and my own experience as a child of migrants, and start to insert that and understand street life and public life through that kind of lens. So I found that process actually quite freeing, because previously it felt like I couldn't actually let that part of my identity come out, because, you know, you're an architect, you do what it is that you do. But I think having focused on the human experience, I used a lot of ethnography and oral ethnography, so study of people in this PhD, you kind of couldn't really ignore that. So that was quite a valuable experience for me.
That's really awesome. That's really awesome. Are there favourite stories or moments that you came across in the research, or that people shared with you, or a situation on the street that...
I think not necessarily a favourite, but one of the most confronting moments was as I was probably about a third of the way into my fieldwork of studying street life. You know, you want to study people in the streets. I'm out there with my camera. I've got, you know, my GoPro strapped to me, like, you know, covered in gadgets and filming everything. And then all of a sudden COVID happened right in the middle of that. And I'm like, well, shit, now I've got literally have no street life to capture. So there was like nothing to observe. And in the end actually became quite an interesting thing to observe, because you kind of see how there's this knee-jerk reaction of people responding to social restrictions and whatnot. And then you see literally markings on the footpath where people have like taped signs saying you have to stand 1 metre apart. There's things in the windows, and there's people get really aggro at each other when they start to get too close. And then the queue outside of like places during lunchtime, it's like this very regular kind of, everyone's 1.5 metres apart, and then you've got this queue extending right around the corner. So observing how behaviours changed during that period was really fascinating. So again, to live through that experience was not necessarily a favourite, but it was definitely one of the most interesting, unexpected parts of the PhD, because who could have predicted that you'd be living through a global pandemic? So, you know, not having street life initially to document and understand, you've just kind of got to make do with what's in front of you, and that's what was in front of me.
That once in a lifetime moment of data capture. Did you have the opportunity to engage with council or feed this research or your outcomes, your ideas beyond the document that's being examined at the moment? Is that something you plan to do?
I did interview a council architect. She was great. She was actually someone I worked with at City of Melbourne as well, so I knew her professionally. And it was really great to hear about these spaces in Footscray and what they were planning to do, what their focus was. And I think the City of Maribyrnong in general does a pretty good job in trying to make Footscray in particular, you know, a vibrant central hub. And hearing that from behind the scenes of what they were doing was really nice. I haven't fed it back yet, because I only just handed it in not too long ago, and I kind of don't really want to look at it right now. So one day I might do something with it.
I think there's a lot of neighbourhoods, a lot of streets, certainly us over here in the Long Beach, where some really active community groups out in Edith Vale have been campaigning for years to refurbish our main strip and a main shopping street out here. And so it's coming. We're told it's coming. The council elections are always an interesting time, but I imagine it would be amazing to have that data on the importance of the public realm, on the public street, and the footpath specifically, out and available.
It's such a challenging space to enact change on as well, because there are so many stakeholders and so many people using it. And one of the things I found out early on was that, you've got the footpath, and that's just, you know, concrete or pavement or whatever it is, and that's just the path. But then that's managed and owned by council. But then you've got the buildings, and that's private, and they're divided into titles every 3 or 4 or 6 metres. And then you've got Vic roads on one side, and then you've got all these, you've got electrical companies and all these service companies that also have a stake. So it's actually a lot of different interests in this one space. So it's not just a path, but it's all the stuff around it. And one of the things I did try to do in my PhD was try to understand footpaths not as just a path that you walk on, but it's a volumetric space. So it's actually a space that's formed by the things around it. So you've got trees and canopies and curbs and awnings. And then once you extract that and actually draw it out, what shape is it? But then that shape is owned and managed by so many different people. So when you do try and change something on it, you've got a shit ton of people to deal with to try and agree on something. And it just takes a really long time.
Not to mention also the local traders aren't the owners.
Yeah. Yeah.
Not always.
There's the people who use them, and then there's the illegal traders. It's a schmozzle, but, an interesting schmozzle.
And really, really interesting to document, because if for whatever reason the threat of gentrification is always there, of course, this activity on the street, these particularly the illegal traders, the more pop-up traders, or the hub of diversity and activity, if it doesn't continue into the future at some point, you have created this document.
Yeah, to capture that. And gentrification of Footscray is a big kind of, I guess it's a big topic of conversation that's been happening for a while. People have been talking about it for over a decade. I mean, some say it's happened, some say it hasn't. Definitely the areas around Footscray gentrified. But it's, so when I was going through the process of writing my PhD, there was a situation where some of the street traders who had been there for, decades selling fruit and veg, mainly elderly Chinese and Vietnamese people who was just selling things out of their garden, they were told to move on and get a permit to trade or just not be there at all. And this happened twice during my research period. And the backlash from the community was actually huge, because everyone was like, well, no, I mean, they've been here for ages and they form a part of the cultural diversity of the street. They form a part of the character. Why should they be regulated the way that they are? Without them, then, Footscray is kind of on this one-way path to sanitisation, which a lot of people didn't seem to like. And again, this is from my deep dive into forums, because, comment sections are great. But also talking to people as well. So, but the general attitude, I think, towards some of these really informal practices was very positive, and people wanted to preserve that, because, once you start to erase the city of these sorts of things, then, yeah, you are sanitising it, and that's not always a good thing.
It's a rare and incredibly dynamic moment through which you managed to conduct your research, both in the lockdown era and 2 removals of the traders. Most people have a fixed research site.
I think that's the kind of beauty about an architecture PhD, in that it can kind of be anything. So it's not like a science PhD where you have to, set out rigorously, this is what my objectives are, this is my methodology. Mine definitely took a bit of a roundabout, very organic path. And I think embracing what was happening in real life was the saviour for me. And, it was hard to go through. It took me about 7 years. And there were times that I didn't think I was going to go back to it, but I did. So again, fingers crossed I pass. And I'm glad I stuck through with it. And I'm glad that it got done. I don't know what I'm going to do with it. I might not actually do anything with it, because I actually prefer practice to academia. But look, it's ticked. It's done.
What motivated you to do some work in academia, to teach, other than the necessity to support a budding practice or starting practice? What drove your interest in pedagogy and your own research?
I really loved teaching. I loved engaging with the students, and I loved just being part of that space where ideas were just free flow and you weren't inhibited by building regs or budgets. And that was always really nice. You do your however many hours at work, go teach at night, and then it's a completely alternative lens to viewing architecture. And I think sometimes that bridge between practice and study isn't very well met. They did sometimes feel like completely different disciplines. So, you know, you might be documenting car parks or whatever at work as a grad, and then you're like, oh, this sucks. But then you kind of go to uni and you're like, and today we're going to talk about, I don't know, whatever it is that you're going to talk about. And I love the speculative aspect about it. And I did it for about 11 years. So I was sessional for 11 years. It was quite a long time. And there were moments when I thought, well, do I want to do this? Do I want to do this permanently? Do I want to get into academia full time, or, you know, at least legitimize my sessional teaching, hence doing the PhD? But I think after where I'm at now, I actually do prefer practice. I've kind of come around to that. But I think it's because I prefer my own practice, not someone else's practice.
Yes. I didn't ask why architecture.
I started painting. I started off painting at uni. So I was doing creative arts, and I didn't really enjoy my first year at uni. So I applied for architecture to transfer into. I applied for law and media communications as well. Got into architecture. But then in hindsight, I had a childhood friend tell me that apparently, and I have very little recollection of this, apparently at high school I said I wanted to be an architect, and I don't really remember this. My mother also tells me that when I was quite small, I used to stack chairs on the dining room table and drape fabric over it to make double-story houses. And I used to drag this tub of water into the bottom of or under the table, and that was my sink. So I think there was the foundations of creating spaces and structures from very early on, but I think somewhere along the line I decided I wanted to be an oil painter instead. But then I came back. So yeah, look, end of the days I got in. So
which is quite often one of the hardest bits of this entire process. Well, we talked about the past, talked about your origin, we talked about the middle. Where do you see the future going? And I'm interested in this question a couple of ways. Both, where do you personally see, based on your research, the future of Footscray, but also the future of design in Melbourne, a bit broader?
Oh, there's such big questions. I mean, Footscray is an interesting one because it's just growing. I don't know if you've been here recently, but I've seen it grow since I was about, 4 years old. Like, we used to come here for groceries when I was a kid. Footscray Market always smelt, still does, probably always will. But it is an exciting time because it is changing so much and it's getting so much denser. The apartment buildings are a bit scary. They're really kind of taking over the skyline. So I think it'd be great to see it as a much more vibrant urban hub. Some parts of it is still very, there's a lot of boarded up shops, and it'd be great to see some of those being occupied. But I think if not managed properly, you might end up with another Docklands or South Melbourne where there's just this oversupply of really shitty apartments. And I think that's where it's sitting at the moment. It could go either way. I think there's a strong enough cultural holding in many pockets of Footscray to keep some of that authenticity alive, I believe. And I really hope that it does hold that. And I think some of the newcomers into the area, the new businesses, I think it's also quite exciting because I can go down the street, I can order a bubble tea, I can get a fancy burger, but I can also buy like chicken feet. Like, not that I've had chicken feet in a while, but the option's there. So there's just a lot of different things on offer, and I like that about it. Yes, there's still crime. Yes, there's still, people sleeping rough, but there's just such a wide gamut of activity that is there. And I really like to see that retained in future. As for design in Melbourne, I don't know, sometimes I feel like I'm in a bit of a bubble. So my little Footscray bubble that I'm just like, well, Melbourne, there's another part of the city. A lot of our work is in Seddon, Yarraville, Footscray as well. So we've kind of really created a bit of a little hole. And I joke sometimes that I don't leave 3011.
That's really funny to think about, but Melbourne is so big, we're 100 kilometres east to west, that it's really no surprise that there are these little bubbles. It's good to hear about the one out west, and I feel that we should be talking about some of these really interesting urban idiosyncrasies out west.
I love my little bubble. Like it's great. Like I spent, after I finished uni, I went to live in the northern suburbs because that's what you do. Because, you got to live in Fitzroy and Carlton once in your life. But then came back to the west and this is actually great. Like this is, there's everything there. It's cheaper for starters. And, there's a really good community, a really strong sense of community.
It's home.
Yeah, it's home. Yeah.
I'll ask my last question, and that's what gives you hope?
Okay. So I'll answer this one on a very personal note because I'm about to have a baby and I hope that it will go well. But I guess it will put a very different perspective on to work, which is, I guess, kind of been the driver of, my adult life so far. Not in the way that, I work all the time, but it's just been a very defining thing that's been going on. But I think hope now would be, well, I guess I get to see someone else grow up and engage and experience the world for the first time and have a lot of firsts that I can sort of be a fly on the wall about. So I think it's going to be nice. And I hope she turns out okay and I don't screw her up too much. That's always it's always a worry.
A little architect, maybe.
I hope she's not an architect.
That is a common answer indeed. Well, we wish you all the very best. All the best of luck with the weeks and months ahead. And thank you so much for joining me on the program, Yvonne.
Thank you.
Thanks for joining me for another evening of Radio Architecture with Ilana Razbash. This live show was broadcast and recorded in the Radio Karim studio on Bunurong Country. You can replay this show wherever you get your podcasts. Thanks for tuning in and supporting community radio. Take care.
Hey, this is Chris Mitzi and you're listening to Radio Karim. Thanks for tuning in.